Any questions about the meditation? Yeah.
I hope I remember it because I thought it in the middle of it. When I start to notice that I have a thought, after several words I notice it's a thought, and then I'm supposed to release it, or kind of...
Well, release it. Maybe that's not the right word. Of course, if we're grasping onto it and following it, we need to release the grasping.
Alright.
But, I mean, in this, it's just let it be.
Yeah.
Let it be means, of course, don't grasp on it, just watch it. That's all.
Yeah, but my question is like, do I have to, not have to, but do I supposed to let it finish its course, or like,
Yeah.
before when I labeled it or something in the first meditation, the minute I labeled it, it's like stopped in the middle and went away.
Yeah.
But now when I don't label it, it just continues to
Right,
flow.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
So
kind
that,
of
yeah.
like I'm not in anything, and I'm continue thinking like normally.
Yeah. So that is probably a sign that you're grasping. Often, if you, in this practice, if there seems to be some thread to the thought, some connection, that's a sure sign there's some level of grasping. What you'll notice is if there's no grasping, you may have lots of thoughts, but they're completely disconnected. There's no connection. Where often, of course, we have a thought, and that causes another thought, that causes something else, and there's some sort of story or flow. That's a sign that there's some level of grasping there. So, again, there's a difference between mindfully thinking about something and observing the thought itself. So we're not mindfully thinking about something in this practice. We are observing the thought themselves. So, therefore, that's why when you gave a label to the thought, to label it, your object of engagement was the thought, not what it was about. If you're engaging what it's about, that will continue and precipitate some other thoughts. Whereas if you're focusing on the thought itself, then you're not feeding the story.
Yeah, but that's what I did. I thought that this is a thought, but the thought itself had a beginning, middle, and end. You know?
And they will have a beginning, middle, and end. And some thoughts and emotions will have a certain amount of energy when they come up. And so some will persist longer than others, but they all, of course, have a beginning, middle, and end. If they're not emotionally charged, generally the beginning, middle, and end is that fast. Yeah. So it's not like they're all the same duration, but a sign that it's persisting over a longer duration is usually a sign that there is some level of grasping involved in it.
All right.
But I mean, again, we need to go into this practice without expectation, because we have for our whole life done one of two things. Either we've entertained our thoughts or we're blocking them or suppressing them. That's what we do instinctively. To think that somehow all of a sudden we're going to be able to sit there and observe everything without doing that is completely unrealistic. Completely unrealistic. So if we have that expectation, we're just going to get frustrated. So just drop that expectation, which is completely unrealistic, and then as best we can, observe the thought. If we get caught up, we release it very gently and come back. Keep doing that, keep doing that. And then slowly, slowly, we're going to get more in the habit of being able to observe these mental events arising and passing. So this is really a long-term project. It's not something that we're going to, one day or two and we've got it. It's not really going to be like that. So we need to be very patient with ourselves. Otherwise, we're just going to get frustrated.
I have two questions. The first is, if I have the same thought coming up over and over again, I was thinking, is it grasping, is it suppressing, is it just buttering, and it's what's happening?
Yeah. Often that is an indication that there's something sort of you need to attend to, but that in the middle of this practice is not the right time. So if you, in this practice, you're noticing a particular thought coming up a lot, then outside of this meditation, then you can do some other reflection on, you know, why is this coming up so much, and look at maybe what's underneath it and so forth. But that's a sort of separate exercise. But also what you're going to find is that as your level of stability and clarity improves, not only are you going to be able to see this thought more clearly, you're going to actually, it'll become much more obvious the whole mechanism of the sequence of why this thought's coming up. So you'll find probably that in this shamatha practice, not only you'll be able to observe it better, you'll be able to start to see more clearly how your mind is dysfunctional, why, you know, why this is coming up. This will become more and more clear even in this meditation. But you can also do as a separate exercise an investigative reflection, looking at the mechanisms for why this thought is persisting and so forth.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like simple thoughts, like,
Right.
like
Sure.
almost notes that's coming up over and over.
Sure,
I
sure.
need to do this. Like,
Yeah. In this practice, of course, we are not to think about why this is happening. This is a separate exercise. It's just observe it. But as I said, if we're just observing, often it becomes very clear, even in this practice, why this is happening. But if not, then outside of it, you can reflect on what the mechanisms are of why this is coming up repeatedly as a separate exercise as well.
okay, and the second one,
Sure.
the end of that meditation was about
Resting in awareness.
yeah.
That's the practice we're doing after lunch now. I just
Okay.
brought it in very briefly to get a
Because
taste.
I started to think about it and I started to freak out. Like, I don't really know how to do that. And then like it brought up a whole world of, you know,
Yeah.
thoughts and
Yeah, I brought it in because after lunch I'm going to explain it. So if we've had a little taste of it, we have an idea of what the practice is. So I deliberately brought it in. But it's the awareness of awareness practice. And I think I mentioned yesterday, this is exactly the point, is that people find it difficult because it's too simple. Really, it's too simple. Because it involves doing nothing. We don't know how to do nothing. We always want to do something. And that's why people find this difficult. What have I got to do in this meditation? Nothing. Just be. We don't know how to be, unfortunately. But if we can be, huge benefit in our life. And we're going to talk about that after lunch.
Yeah, it's regarding to what we talked about, but this is the first time I've been trying to observe the mind. I've been always observing the breathing.
Sure.
And now I feel like the breathing is a very massive exercise.
It's
like, it was hard to me to try only to observe the mind.
right.
And then I tried to go to the anchor, to the breathing.
Yeah.
And then I felt, oh my God, I'm like doing a big something. Just to observe the breathing seems very like an action. It doesn't seem to me before like an action. It seems before, when I've been practicing the breathing, I felt like I'm doing nothing.
Oh, okay.
But now, when I'm observing the breathing, I don't feel like I'm doing nothing. I feel like I'm really...
And it may be because you're switching between mental and physical. Maybe that's why you're having this experience, because looking at the mind and then somehow going into the body, the physical aspect, because they're quite different. Maybe that's why you're having this experience. But you're finding it like strange or difficult, or...
Now it just seems like an action. Like very...
I mean, again,
it was too early to try the mind exercise.
I mean, if you find it helpful having that as an anchor for this practice, use it. If you don't, then just leave it out altogether. Because eventually we'll need to leave it out in this practice. It's only something at the beginning stages if we're just constantly getting carried away and we find that holding on to the breath a little bit is helpful to anchor us. If it's useful, then use it. If not, then just leave it out altogether. Because eventually we're going to have to let that go in this practice anyway. Okay. One more thing I want to mention before we break for lunch, and that's something that can come up in any of these shamatha practices, particularly, well, actually in the breath and this practice, and particularly the practice we're going to do after lunch, and that is that in this practice, often a lot of fear can come up. And the most common reason the fear comes up is because in these practices, due to observing the breath or observing the mind or resting in awareness, there is nothing, there's nothing reinforcing the sense of me. Now our sense of me is identified primarily with this solid body here. You know, this is me. And often our sense of me is constantly reinforced by mental activity. We identify ourselves with all of our thoughts, emotions, memories. That's me. This is me, that's me. And that's constantly happening. So we have this constant reinforcing of sense of me. But from a Buddhist perspective, this is a false sense of me. We are none of those things. Because either we have a body, we have thoughts, we have emotions, we have memories, or we are them. We can't be them and have them. And if we think about it a little bit, we are none of those things because they are things we have. But what we do is,
Can you repeat that, what you just said?
yeah, we identify ourselves with some aspect of the body and the mind. This is me. I am my thoughts. I am my emotions. I am my memories. I am my personality. That's me. But actually, thinking a bit about it, it can't be me, none of those things. Because all of those things are things which we have. We have a body. So we can't have a body and be the body. It's illogical. We can't have thoughts and be thoughts. Illogical. We can't have memories and emotions and be those very things. And we can't have a personality and be that personality. Illogical. We're none of those things. But what we do is we falsely identify ourselves with those things. And why that's false and how to fix that, we're going to look at in 2 weeks' time in the Vipassana practice. But the reason I brought it in here is that in this shamatha practice, often these things that are constantly reinforcing this false sense of me often collapse. You know, if the mind becomes still, there's no mental content reinforcing the sense of me. And if we focus well on the breath, the solid sense of body often completely collapses. So often in this practice, whether it's the breath, mind, or awareness, we can get into a situation where there's nothing reinforcing this sense of me. And then often people develop fear because they feel like they're going out of existence, because there's nothing reinforcing this solid sense of me. But this fear is completely irrational fear. We're not going out of existence. And Alan Wallace has some advice about that on page 100. So I'd like to read that out and maybe make a few more comments. One of the more common challenges in this practice, and here he's talking about this practice we're doing now, but it also can come up in the practice we're going to do after lunch, and also even in the breath practice it can come up. One of the more common challenges in this practice is the emergence of fear. As you release your grip on the contents of the mind, you are undermining your normal sense of personal identity, which is constantly reinforced by thinking, by recalling, and identifying with your personal history, hopes, and plans. Now you are disengaging from those familiar supports for substantiating your ego. As lapses between thoughts occur more and more frequently and for longer periods, your awareness hovers in a kind of empty space, a vacuum devoid of personhood. You may come into the grip of fear as your normal sense of who you are loses its footing. The teacher Glen Svennson warned his students that such dread may well arise during their training. It is crucial, he counselled, not to identify it nor give it any credence. Some kinds of fear are based in reality. They protect us from danger, filling the body with energy so that we can flee or protect ourselves in whatever way necessary. But this kind of dread with no clear object has no such basis in reality. There is no danger in the empty, luminous space of awareness. You have nothing to lose but your false sense of an independent, controlling ego. The only thing being threatened is an illusion. If you don't identify with it, there's nothing to fear. If you do identify with this fear, it may bring your entire practice to a grinding halt and throw you into deep emotional imbalances. So it is of utmost importance to observe such fear without distraction and without grasping. Keep to the essentials of the practice. Another emotional imbalance that may crop up at any time throughout this training is depression, which may be related to a deep-rooted sense of guilt and low self-esteem. When any of these emotions or attitudes arise during meditation sessions, treat them like any other mental event. Watch their emergence, see how they linger, and then observe them disappear back into the space of the mind. Examine them with discerning intelligence, but without emotional charge. Rather than identifying with them or owning them, let them emerge from the space of awareness and dissolve back, without any intervention on your part, even without any preference for them to go away. Let the space of your mind be emotionally neutral, like physical space, which could not care less whether bullets or hummingbirds streak through it. So I think that's some very practical advice. And we're going to really be looking a lot more at this idea of this fear and the false sense of that fear. That's one of the things that we're going to be covering in 2 weeks' time in the Vipassana practice. Because it can come here in the Shamatha, but it often becomes much more pronounced in the Vipassana practice because we are directly investigating this sense of me in the Vipassana practice. Whereas here in the Shamatha practice, it's simply due to having a calm, clear mind that the false sense of me is lacking being reinforced. Whereas in the Vipassana, we are directly targeting it. But in both cases, we can have fear arising, and again, it's completely irrational fear. Nothing to fear. Okay? Let's break for lunch. Come back at 1:30, and then we're going to look at the awareness of awareness practice in much more detail then.